The Women of 1862. I'm your trainer, Lori Coffey. Delayed by the war, the movement changed course when it came to getting the vote. While it wasn't universally accepted, they decided to take a backseat to the abolition of slavery due to the influence of Frederick Douglass. This, of course, would help enslaved women like Elizabeth Keckley and Cathay Williams. Cathay was born to an enslaved mother and a free father in Independence, Missouri in 1844. She worked as a house slave on the William Johnson plantation just outside of Jefferson City. She turned 17 when the war broke out. Plantation owners fled as the 6th U.S. Infantry entered the city. The enslaved workers, while no longer captive to the plantation, were not yet free, as that required a change to the Constitution. Which amendment? The 13th Amendment. But the Union officers knew that they couldn't win the war without these workers. Cathay used her washerwoman skills to help the troops, then reluctantly, by request, learned to cook for the officers, accompanying the infantry all over Missouri. They paid her with food and tips as she marched with the soldiers down to the Battle of Pea Ridge, driving rebel forces into Arkansas, and then down to Louisiana for the Red River Campaign, driving them from Shreveport. She enjoyed the adventure as they traveled from Georgia to Virginia to Iowa. So when emancipation finally came in 1865, like so many others, she had to decide, what now? She determined to continue serving her country while simply trying to support herself. Later, she told a reporter, I wanted to make my own living and not be dependent on relations or friends. A lot of women in 1862 of all colors would have loved that option. But at 5'9", Cathay Williams had the gumption to switch to William Cathay when she dressed like a man and enlisted in the U.S. Army for a 3-year tour of duty. After passing a somewhat cursory medical exam, you think? William was assigned to the 38th U.S. Colored Infantry Regiment, along with a male cousin who never gave her away. The soldiers earned $13 a month, which of course was more than any of them had ever gotten before. Congress had established these regiments to help rebuild the country after the war and to fight warring natives in the West. The tribes facing these soldiers on the battlefield saw their dark curly hair and their fierce fighting nature and began calling them what? Buffalo soldiers. In addition to their military duties, they served as caretakers for the new national parks, including fighting fires, curbing poaching, and constructing roads. It's very big in Arizona, very big. In St. Louis, Cathay, or William, contracted smallpox, a dread disease that hospitalized the private. Remember, that's what Elmer Ellsworth's little brother died of. Catching up with the company at Fort Riley, Kansas, Cathay once again went to the hospital, this time with a severe skin rash. After recovering later that summer, the entire company headed 500 miles southwest and uphill to Fort Union in New Mexico. Unfortunately, cholera swept through the ranks. After recovering, she rejoined her unit in isolated New Mexico. The daily working pace and the altitude compromised her health and proved too much for her. Later, she said she played sick, complaining of pains and rheumatism. When I first discovered this, I thought, slacker. I mean, my mother was in the Army. She didn't take a day off. But then I'd imagine the tenuous health of a young slave girl, always working, living in the elements without proper clothing or footwear, lacking a balanced diet and necessary protein. They mostly ate just bread. Then she gets a deadly disease, and immediately upon recovery, she rides horseback 1,500 miles through the desert to rejoin her regiment. I couldn't have done any of that at the peak of my health. After several hospital stays, the Army surgeon finally discovered that he was a she and informed the post commander. While her male coworkers were furious with her cover-up, she was honorably discharged 2 years into her contract. But that's not the end of her story. After becoming Cathay again, she worked as a cook and seamstress and later moved to Pueblo, Colorado, a steel town and haven for diversity. I didn't know that. I've been there and I didn't know that. Known as the melting pot of the West. At one point, more than 24 different foreign language newspapers were published there. Although she married, it ended badly after her husband stole all her money and her team of horses. Cathay called the sheriff and had him arrested. Then she quickly moved 100 miles south to Trinidad, Colorado. A reporter discovered her, and her whole military ruse was published in the St. Louis Daily Times. Not understanding the reach of the press, the story may have kept her from getting a medical pension. In September of 93, she complained to a doctor that she suffered from neuralgia, and diabetes had taken her toes. She also had diabetes, forcing her to limp with a crutch. The doctor, however, judged her not qualified for disability payments. Military doctors agreed after reading the article about how she played sick. But her accomplishments stand as the first African-American woman to enlist in the Army, the only documented woman to serve in the Army during the American Frontier Wars, and the only known female Buffalo Soldier. Cathay moved from enslaved to military pioneer to entrepreneur in her short life, dying at about age 48. This monument, erected by the Buffalo Soldiers, stands in Leavenworth, Texas, testament that she cut through the barriers. Maybe not an official hero, but she is nevertheless a woman worth knowing from 1862.